Well, welcome back to True Crime Files of Los Angeles Inside Story. As you know, we're trying to discuss various issues of the criminal justice system. For the last, 3 to 5 years, there's been a lot of criticism of the criminal justice system in the sense that the sentences seem too long, too many people are incarcerated, and there's a feeling that maybe other approaches could be used as far as sentencing. And there's no question, when it comes to the criminal justice system, sentencing most likely is one of the critical points. And in the last several podcasts, we've talked about punishment sentencing, and we talked about retribution, the old concept of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And then we talked about deterrence, because for years we've always thought about deterrence, that if a person is punished sufficiently, they won't want to be punished again, and therefore they're not going to commit the crime again. So that's as to the individual. However, there's another part of that as far as deterrence. We want the public to be deterred, not want to think about or consider committing a crime. So that's deterrence. Now, a lot of you have expressed to me that why can't we have more rehabilitation? And that's one that we're going to talk about today, rehabilitation. Because there's many aspects of that that have to be considered. When the person comes up for sentencing in front of a judge, what are the factors? What are the things that have to be considered for rehabilitation? And why are you so interested in it? Well, there's legitimate interest. One is, it denies a person their freedom to go about their life. The other thing about rehabilitation is prison and jail are very expensive. So when you incarcerate somebody, there's a high price for society, not just because of removing them, but also keeping them, the guards, housing them, and all of that goes into putting a person in prison. So, yes, rehabilitation is something that we want to consider. However, whenever we're considering rehabilitation, we have to think about recidivism. Why? Well, we have to talk about facts and life. The numbers are out there, and anybody can see them. That somebody who's committed a crime, they've been convicted, they will commit that crime, maybe the same crime or a different crime, within 1 year. 50% of the people will commit that crime again. There's just a lot of reasons that rehabilitation has a lot of issues, a lot of problems. And we've already talked about some of those, and that's the mental health issue of it. So many people have mental illness who are pushed into the criminal justice system. And of course, they're not real good candidates for rehabilitation. Then you have substance abuse, meaning there's a lot of people on drugs, strung out on drugs, as well as alcohol. Other factors are employment. If somebody doesn't have skills or don't have jobs, they're not going to do well with rehabilitation. And finally, education. There's no question. A person who have skills with education is going to do much better with rehabilitation. Now, I put this together as far as what I consider are the things that should be thought about for rehabilitation, and you have to weigh them. How much weight do you give to each one of them? The first one is the seriousness of the crime. No question about that. Then you consider the person's criminal background. Have they been in trouble before? Should they have learned from their prior mistakes? Then we talk about the victim. How much injury or damage to the victim. We've already talked about mental disturbance, addiction. Then what involvement did the person have? Were they the mastermind, or did they drive the getaway car, or just maybe did surveillance? The other is remorsefulness. What is the convicted person? Are they remorseful? Are they just sorry they got caught? Then there is the question of motivation to change. Some are motivated, others are not. And we already talked about education. And the last thing I think should be considered is what type of contribution can this person make to society? So those are the elements, the factors I think should be considered by the judge at time of sentencing. Now, the best way to learn about these things is to look at specific cases. And this first one I want to talk about is the Joe Hunt case. Most of you know it as the Billionaire Boys Club. Joe Hunt grew up in the San Fernando Valley, a bright kid out there, skinny, tall, lanky kid. And he had the opportunity to take an exam to go to Harvard Preparatory School. And he took it and did very, very well. And he got a scholarship to it. And that's where all the rich and famous kids go, from Beverly Hills, from Bel Air. So what am I saying here? He had the opportunity to meet those kids for 4 years. He got along well with them. They knew him. So that is a connection that he has. And after high school, he goes on. He went to USC, did well there. And he became a CPA. I think it was the youngest CPA in California. And then he went back to Chicago, got on the mercantile exchange, did well there, made a lot of money. He also lost a lot of money, and he gained experience as far as investing. He comes back to Los Angeles, and he decides to set up an investment company, and he calls it the Billionaire Boys Club. With all those connections he had with the Harvard Prep School, he meets those old colleagues, student friends of his, and he said, I'll give you jobs, come work with me. And he would give them titles, as vice president of this or that. Their parents loved it. For once, their rich kids were doing well. So Joe Hunt knew how to use all these people and would use their sports cars for collateral. So this investment company got money to get started, and they did several types of investments. One was a cyclotron. It was taking ore and putting in fine powder. And it worked very well, but it was going to take a while for it to get developed. So that was one investment. The other thing is they would take luxury cars from Europe and ship them to the United States, sell them at a big profit in Beverly Hills. The other got back in the commodities exchange. And by using these rich kids, they were able to make a certain amount of money there. However, the entire thing of his investment organization was based on what we call the Ponzi scheme. He needed new investors to come in. He needed that new money to pay the old investors, because the old investors got a big return. They made 25% on their investments. They thought it was great, but Joe needed new money and he couldn't get it. There was a recession going on. So he knew this Ron Levine. He was a person who had a number of Swiss bank accounts, and he thought, well, okay, I could get him to loan me some money. I need like $1.5 million, and I'll be able to keep the Billionaire Boys Club going. But after a while, Joe Hunt realized he would never be able to pay it back. So the idea was he was going to have to kill Ron Levine, but he was willing to do that. So he gets this all put together. The plan is working well. They get Ron Levine to write a check for $1.5 million that will be invested in the Billionaire Boys Club. And then, of course, they had to kill him. So he's killed by Joe Hunt and Pittman, his other member. And they wrap his body in a shower curtain and take it out to Soledad Canyon, and he's buried somewhere out there. And takes that check to the bank, and it bounces. That Swiss bank account had only $49 in it. Wow. So anyway, the case kind of falls apart. We prosecute Joe Hunt, and I have to make the decision as to whether we're going to go for the death penalty on him. And I had to consider all the factors about his background and what type of crime it was. And let me just go through what I had to consider. And this is the same thing you would do for rehabilitation. The crime. Well, it was a serious crime. As far as his record, he had no record, no criminal record. As far as mental disturbance, illness, no, he didn't have any of that, and there's no addiction. Yeah, he had a lot of involvement in it. He did the planning on it. It wasn't exactly remorseful about what he had done. No motivation for change. But when it comes to education, highly educated, and the last thing about contribution to society, bright guy, good businessman, in investments, working with people. So there were a lot of positive signs there. However, the jury came back deciding life without the possibility of parole, and he was sentenced to state prison where he is today. So that gives you an idea. You know, we considered the rehabilitation. Now, I want to talk about a doctor, Dr. Murray, and Michael Jackson. Now, Michael Jackson he needed money. And AEG came along and said, look, you know, if you do some concerts at the O2 Arena in London, we'll pay you a lot of money. And they set up 10 concerts there. And they're all sold out within, several hours. So AEG says, whoa, let's do more concerts. We can make huge amounts of money on this. And they set it up for 50 concerts. Well, Michael Jackson is not in real good health, to say the least, but he's willing to do it because he needs the money. And he shows up at the rehearsal in Los Angeles late. He's only able to stay there for a couple of hours, and he goes home. And he wants to rest. He wants to get some sleep. What had been agreed with AEG was that they hired a doctor, Dr. Conrad Murray, who was a cardiologist. They were going to pay him $150,000 per month to make it able that Michael could sleep. And it seemed to be working out. So that night, when Michael comes home, he wants to get some rest. He can't sleep. And he asks the doctor, who's there at his side, to give me propofol. And the doctor at 3 o'clock, he says, okay, and gives him propofol, a drip system of that. And Michael falls asleep. It worked. So everything is going well, and Dr. Murray is there. And around 10 o'clock, he wants to go to the restroom, so he gets up by the side of the bed there and goes to the restroom down the hallway. And he's gone for, so many minutes, and he comes back, and Michael's not breathing. He's not breathing. So the doctor starts CPR. He starts giving him CPR, and Michael's not responding. And the paramedics are called. And they come out, and they're trying to revive him, and they can't do it. So it's decided to take Michael to UCLA emergency room. So they do. They get over there, and the emergency doctor looks at Michael and tries to revive him. And Dr. Murray said, you got to revive him. You have to do it. And they tried again and again, but they couldn't revive him. But what was interesting about Dr. Murray was he said to the assistant of Michael, he said, Brother Michael has some cream in the house that I know he wouldn't want the world to know about. Well, this is Dr. Murray thinking about, now, Michael Jackson has been dead for maybe 2 hours. Why is he talking that way? That's kind of strange. When the police get over to the house where Michael, was living, they find all these medicines, a lot of propofol, a lot of different drugs right there. And when they did the autopsy, Michael's body, they found propofol. It was in his system, and it was administered inappropriately. And the standard of care for propofol wasn't being used. And that was why the medical examiner came to the conclusion that it was a homicide. Now, what is the effects of propofol? Well, it decreases your respiratory rate, it lowers your blood pressure, and slows your heart rate. All of that's good when you're doing an operation, some surgeries going on. However, you need to have certain equipment there. You have to have EKG, you have to have a pulse oximeter, oxygen mask, all of these things. None of this was in Michael's bedroom or anywhere in the house. So he is giving propofol, but not appropriately monitoring it. Now, We talked about Dr. Murray. He went to the restroom. He said he was gone only for a few minutes. However, when we got his cell phone and we started examining it, we found that he was making phone calls. He called his girlfriend in Dallas, Texas, talked to her for, 5-10 minutes. Then he called a stripper in Las Vegas, talked to her for a number of minutes. Then he called one of his girlfriends up in the Bay Area, talked to her, and then at the very end he talked to his girlfriend in Los Angeles. And the total time that he was on the phone was 47 minutes. That was the time that Michael Jackson was dying on his bed. Okay, so let's get into rehabilitation. What are the considerations as to Dr. Murray? Well, first, the seriousness of the crime. Well, it's maybe voluntary manslaughter. That isn't first-degree murder. The doctor has no criminal record as far as mental disturbance, no mental disturbance, no addiction, no alcohol. As far as remorsefulness, that's a question mark. Motivation to change, there's no question that Dr. Murray would be much more careful in giving propofol in the future. Well educated, he was a cardiologist, well educated. As far as contribution to society, there's no way that you could deny that he had a lot of skills, talent. He could do so much for so many people because of his education. So yes, there's a lot of things to say rehabilitation would be good for him. Now, the judge at time of sentencing, because he was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, the judge said, look, you're not showing any signs of remorse about this. And the judge gave him 4 years in state prison. So those were the factors. Now we've talked about a businessman, Joe Hunt. We've talked about a doctor. Now we're going to talk about a lawyer. This was a lawyer back in New York, David Mahler. He had good practice back there, did defense work. Made a lot of money at that, but he met a young lady and decided to move to Hollywood, come out to California. And he worked as a stock trader, trying to take the state bar exam, but wasn't passing it, but was doing very, very well. And he got a residence at the top of the Hollywood Hills. Those of you familiar with Sunset Strip, you just go from the Sunset Strip up the hill to the top of it, and that's where David Mahler had his house. What a fantastic view from there, and all the parties, great place for parties. And I guess you could say Mahler was living the fast life. He had fast cars, he had fast women, and he had a lot of drugs, a lot of cocaine. Party City was right there in his house. There was a young lady, Christy, and Christy just was very fond of David Mahler. He was always fun to be with, and she didn't have much, and she got into the cocaine. She liked the cocaine, but he would become belligerent at times when he had too much. Then one day, one evening, she's over there, and they're in the bedroom there, and there's a little bit of an argument back and forth, and she wants to go home. She's tired, and asks, would you just drive me home? And he says, no, just sit on the floor there. And she's upset. She wants to go home, and he's not going to take her home. What he does, he goes into that closet. You see where that door is? Goes in there, and he gets a revolver, takes it out, and he takes one bullet, and puts it in that revolver. Then he spins it. And then he takes it and puts it up against her head, the temple. And he pulls the trigger, and it doesn't go off. And, everybody laughs. It seems funny. And he pulls it again, and it goes off, and it kills her. Shoots her right through the temple. Now, what do? You have a dead body. He stuffs the body in the trunk of his Jaguar, drives her out to Barstow in the desert. And, there's Route 66 goes out there. And on the way to Daggett, he pulls over. There's a culvert. He takes the body and stuffs it under one of the culverts. And, nobody is going to ever find the body there. Nothing is ever going to happen. However, there was a flash flood, and the body floated out. and somebody came by and saw it. And eventually we were able to make a case against David Mahler, and he's prosecuted, and he's convicted of second-degree murder. Now, let's go through rehabilitation. Is it a serious offense? Well, yeah, somebody died as a result of it. Did he have a criminal record? He didn't have any criminal record at all. There was no mental disturbance. But when it comes to addiction, well, he was using cocaine and he was high on cocaine. As far as remorseful, well, most likely remorseful only that he got caught. Education, highly educated. Contribution to society, of course he could. He was able to do a lot of things. So, yes, it is one of those things. Now, how is that going to factor in as far as rehabilitation? Well, the judge gives him, for second-degree murder, gives him a life sentence, and that would mean that about 12 years, he would be maybe 8 years, he would be out on good behavior. So that's an attorney. Now let's go on to somebody who's very, very prominent in entertainment. That involves Roman Polanski. Most of you know about him. His wife, Sharon Tate, was murdered by the Manson family. Now, Polanski in 1977 was asked by Vogue to do a photo shoot. And they wanted something different, and he decided, well, I'll do it with young girls and start with a model who was 13 years old, picked her up from her house and took her up to Jack Nicholson's house. And there, you can see that's where they were. And he wanted her to mellow out, in the right frame of mind, gives her a Quaalude and gives her several glasses of champagne, and she drinks it. And he says, well, okay, get in the spa jacuzzi, and she does. She's in the jacuzzi there, and he said, oh, take your clothes off, and I'll take some pictures. And then he gets in there with her, and there's some sexual contact that goes on. She, doesn't like what's going on, so she gets out of the jacuzzi, and she goes into the bedroom, and he follows her into the bedroom. And he starts touching her, and she says, no, no, no. And then he asks the question, are you on the pill? And she said, no, no. And he said, oh, that's okay. We'll sodomize, we'll cop, and, have safe intercourse. And he pushes her down on the bed and, has sexual intercourse with her for several hours right there on that bed. Then afterwards, he takes her back home, drops her off. Everything is fine. However, she gets on the phone and calls her girlfriend up, and she is kind of laughing about, what went on up there at Jack Nicholson's house and what Roman Polanski had done to her. And the sister overhears this and then tells the mother. The mother is livid. She calls the police, and the police come out and take a report. Well, anyway, eventually charges are filed against Roman Polanski. Case goes on for a while. What should be done on this? And they try to work out a plea bargain. And, he did not want the public to know what he did to this 13-year-old girl. On the other hand, the victim's family didn't want the case to go. They didn't want her to testify in court. So there was kind of both sides wanted to find a settlement. And it was agreed that if he went to a 90-day study at the state prison, that would be sufficient. He would come back, and the judge would say, okay, that's sufficient, put him on probation. So it looked like it was going to work out okay. He goes out to Chino State Prison, and he serves 47 days, not 90 days. When the judge found out that he hadn't served the 90 days, there was a talk, well, maybe he should go to state prison then. And what Roman Polanski does, when he hears about the judge is possibly going to put him in prison, he gets on a plane and flies to Paris. He's gone. And he's on the lam, for 40 years, running from the United States. We tried to extradite him and never have been able to get him back. Now, I want to go through the rehabilitation, the question of that. First question, is it a serious offense? Now, many people in Europe, the countries in Europe would say, no, it's not that serious of an offense. Uh, I don't know whether you call it molesting, minor. In the United States, it is a serious offense. So that causes a problem as far as the extradition. Okay, next issue, he has no criminal record. Now, as far as the victim after all these years, she's been paid off. No, she doesn't want the case prosecuted. She would like everything dropped. Okay, next issue, mental disturbance, none of that. Addiction, no. Remorseful, doesn't look like any remorse. He liked young women. And education, yeah, he was educated, University of Prague. Contribution to society, well, as far as a director of movies, most likely there are very few people who have been more successful than Roman Polanski. So that's the issue that you're going to have. What should the sentence be now? Not easy. It could be very subjective. Now let me do one more for you, and that's the Dominick Dunne's daughter. Most of you are familiar with Dominick Dunne, a famous writer. His daughter was an actress and was in a lot of TV parts, and eventually was in a movie, Poltergeist, and was the older sister in that. And she met a fellow, John Sweeney. He was a chef at a very prominent restaurant in Los Angeles. And they dated, they had an affair, and they got living together at this house. This was where they were living together, and it went on for over a year or two. Things were fine, but he was very, very possessive of her, and he was always concerned. She was associating with a lot of actors, but just jealous. And they would have arguments, and it got abusive, and they called it off, and then got back together again. So very volatile. Then they broke it off. They were living separately, and she was rehearsing for a new part, and she has her people there. He comes over to the house, grabs her, takes her out, and takes her over to the neighbor's house, backyard, and strangles her. They get in an argument, and he strangles her. And the paramedics are called. They take her to Cedars-Sinai. And they get there, they find she's brain dead. And the family has to make a decision that next day whether to pull life support. Tough, tough decision for the family. Well, Dominick Dunne, he went to the trial. He was there every single day in the trial and watched it. And John Sweeney was convicted. And what were the things to be considered? The crime, it was involuntary manslaughter. Sweeney had no criminal record. There was no mental disturbance. There was no drugs. He was very remorseful that it happened. Moderately educated. As far as contribution to society, he was well thought of as a chef in the Los Angeles area. So, the judge considered the factors. He factored in rehabilitation, and he gave the defendant only 6 years. 6 years for involuntary manslaughter. He ended up serving only 2.5 years. Well, what did it do to Dominick Dunne? He was outraged by the light sentence, and the rest of his life he wrote about true crime, about injustice in the court system. He really resented what the judge had done as far as the sentencing. Now, as far as my involvement with Dominick Dunne, I would see him in court for years, and he would talk to me, and he encouraged me to write true crime books. He was a great, great writer. Well, okay, that is how rehabilitation can factor in, and you can see where the victim's family might not agree with a light sentence. Now I just want to talk about rehabilitation programs. Why is there difficulty with determining are people getting rehabilitated? And how do you track that? How do you determine what is the standard? Now, let me just tell a story. I was in charge of the district attorney's office in the Alhambra court, and I was there handling a calendar, and a director of a rehabilitation center came up to me and said, Mr. Bowers, could you refer some of these convicted people to me? And he said, we have a 90% success rate. People who come through our facility, we do counseling, we do for drugs, we do for mental personality disorders, all sorts of things. I said, okay. And he said, well, if they successfully, dismiss the case. And I said, that's fine. If you show me. And he said, we have a 90% success rate. So I did. A lot of people were referred there and cases were dismissed after I was told that they successfully completed it. But it was about a year later, I was in the courtroom and I noticed some of the same people I had referred to this organization were back, had new cases. And I saw the director there and I said, hey, I thought you said you had a 90% success rate. Why are so many? And he says, well, we are 90% success. And I said, well, what type of definition of success is? Well, success is determined if a person in our facility is not caught for 6 months, then that was success. Is that? And all these people, I accepted the fact that they had turned their lives around, they had been totally rehabilitated, but it was only if they had been clean for 6 months without getting caught. Well, some of us would say, well, that should be the reason for success, able to not be found or caught by the police. But when you talk about rehabilitation programs, you have to be very careful as to what they mean they're able to do for their clientele. So, yeah, there's various factors that come into play as far as the degree of success. Now, we have now talked about rehabilitation. We've done retribution, deterrence. Our next podcast, we're going to talk about incapacitation. And that is when we have to separate somebody from society for their protection and for the protection of society. So join us again for another True Crime Files of Los Angeles Inside Story when we address the other factor in sentencing, incapacitation. Join us then. Or no,